In this video, we're going to be talking about how atheism and, by extension, efilism are inherently existentially nihilistic.
To us, that should just be blatantly obvious because life simply doesn't exist for a purpose under atheism. That just literally doesn't have a purpose. So it is existentially nihilistic. I don't know how you could deny that. Now, within efilism specifically, it's funny because it's contested. A lot of efilists reject the notion that they are nihilists, but they certainly are. Gary says life is pointless, purposeless, futile, and lacks overriding meaning, and then says he's not a nihilist in any way. It's like, no, you're clearly an existential nihilist, right? All existential nihilism means is that you think life lacks a meaning or purpose. And that's another thing. I've seen a lot of ethicists say, well, maybe not a lot, but I've seen a couple say that they're not existential nihilists because they think life is purposeless, not meaningless. But it's like, do you know what the definition of this word means? Because it still counts as nihilism to think that life is purposeless. It's purposeless or meaningless. If you think either of those, that qualifies you as a nihilist. It's just kind of goofy to pretend that it doesn't.
Well, there can't be any meaning or purpose to life. I mean, a meaning you can invent for yourself, and a purpose you can also invent for yourself, but there is no objective meaning or purpose to life.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's true
And
whether or not there is or isn't a creator. And this is just the case because the laws of physics don't dictate that there is a meaning or purpose to your life or the universe in general. Whether or not
yeah,
there is a creator, let's say that there is a creator, just for the sake of argument, there still wouldn't be an objective meaning or purpose. There would be a meaning or purpose that the creator intends for you, but that doesn't mean that you're obligated to carry it out, which would be true were there an objective meaning or purpose.
yeah,
I mean, something being objective means that it's factually the case, you know? It would just be true just as a consequence of the way that the universe is arranged. That's what it would mean for there to be an objective purpose or meaning to something.
yeah,
Something would either carry out, some set of tasks just as a consequence of the way that the universe is configured, or something would have meaning, again, just as a consequence of the way that the universe is configured. But meaning, well, actually, both purpose and meaning are really mental constructs. You could argue that there's no purpose in anything anywhere. There are laws of physics, there are natural arrangements, are just the way things exist in reality. I mean, I'm not a physicist. I don't know exactly the best way to phrase it, but I mean, there are different ways that different particles move and things like that, but, they don't have a purpose.
yeah. And the very funny thing about it is the detractors of efilism, they always call you a nihilist anyway. And they always say, I've seen so many people say, so many detractors, so many optimists say that, oh, efilism, it's just another form of nihilism. It's, oh, more boring nihilism. But the funny thing is, they don't even have an argument. They just say, oh, it's nihilism. And then they have no argument. It's like, I mean, life literally just doesn't serve a purpose. So I don't get why you think saying it's nihilist is an argument in and of itself. Life just literally doesn't exist for a fucking purpose. It doesn't, yeah, it just doesn't. But they think that's an argument to say it's nihilist. But that's not a fucking argument. They don't have an argument against nihilism. Life doesn't serve a purpose.
Yeah, I would say that, like atheism, nihilism is just true. I mean, I would say both are true
Yeah.
positions. But let's say that we can't verify that both are true. Both are just the null hypothesis anyway. I mean,
Hmm.
there's no reason to assume a God until one is proven to exist. And there's no reason to assume that there's a meaning or purpose to anything until said meaning and purpose can be defined and proven to exist. So,
Yeah.
I mean, nihilism is just the null hypothesis. There's no reason to not be a nihilist by default. And I would argue that all people are nihilists by default, just as all people are atheists by default as well. It's, cultural indoctrination that convinces people that, there is a God, that life has meaning, that life has purpose, and so on.
Yeah, I'd
But
agree with that.
yeah, but regarding the usage of the term nihilist, it's just degenerated into a pejorative for anyone with a pessimistic perspective. I mean, there are people who argue that life has meaning, but they have a pessimistic view on certain things, so other people will label them a nihilist. So, I mean, in common parlance, in common discourse, nihilist is just a meaningless term anyway. It's just totally diluted.
But that is the great irony, though. The term nihilist itself became meaningless.
It is kind of funny, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of ethicists don't like to use the term nihilist because of moral nihilism, but on the topic of morals, it's just a fact that, well, morality is not objective. Even God doesn't make morality objective because God simply is subject defining it. It's just deity defined morality. That's a mistake a lot of people make. They think God would make morality objective, but God doesn't. God is a subject. Objective in this sense means independent of sentient organisms, right? Yeah, God just not make morality objective.
Yeah, morality would have to be a function of the universe's existence. It'd have to be something that just happens just as a consequence of existence to be objectively true. Just like light objectively exists, just as a consequence of the way our universe works, just as a consequence of the laws of physics, light exists. Yeah, morals would have to be the same way for them to be objective. I mean, if there were a God, it could have its own set of standards, it could have its own moral sense, but those would still be just that God's opinion. And unless you're physically obligated to obey them, unless it's like literally physically impossible to go against that God's moral sense, then morals are not objective. Well, you could argue that morals are objective in that, let's assume that there's a creator. You could maybe argue that morals are objective in that there is a standard that God has. But again, if you're not physically obliged to obey those standards, then they're not objective. They're not a fact. They're just an
Yeah,
opinion. They just exist within a mind. It might be the mind of God, but it's still a subjective set of standards
yeah,
within a mind.
yeah. Still a subject.
And I just want to say,
Um,
regarding in Mendham, he says that value is objective, that suffering objectively matters. I wouldn't say so, and I wouldn't say that the ethicist ethical sense is objective either. I mean, it's more objective than most in that it is based upon objective facts and objective facts only. But I wouldn't say that any prescription is morally objective. Like, I wouldn't say that carrying out homicide is morally, quote unquote, or ethically the best thing that can be done. I would just say it's the best thing that can be done to eliminate suffering. Because you couldn't really say that eliminating suffering is objectively the correct thing to do from a moral or ethical standpoint, just because there is nothing objective in an ultimate sense. It is still subjective. It's just, it may be universal. I mean, just because something is
it's universal, yeah, not
yeah,
objective.
yeah, just because something is universally accepted doesn't mean it's objective. It's not a function of the way that our universe is arranged that eliminating suffering is a quote unquote good thing. Good and bad are still products of minds. They're still subjective valuations. So even eliminating suffering is still simply a subjective opinion. That eliminating suffering is a good thing is still our opinion.
Yeah, we're just making a suggestion.
And of course, our
That's,
opinion is unlike religious dogma, for instance. It's based upon an analysis of the objective facts, which is what
yeah,
I feel makes efilism far superior to other ethical systems. It looks at reality as it actually is and then comes to conclusions based upon that, comes to an optimal solution. If we're interested in minimizing suffering, the best solution, the most effective solution, the most permanent solution is to carry out homicide painlessly.
yeah,
And you can disagree and say that eliminating suffering shouldn't be our highest goal, but it all goes back to opinion. But I feel most people would agree that eliminating suffering is the best thing we can do, especially if we're talking to atheists. I think most atheists will acknowledge that eliminating suffering is the best goal that you could come up with.
yeah. Well, it was just Steve was kind of funny because, when Steve pro extinction debated vegan gains, his premise was that extinction's an objective moral truth. It's just like, man, you just literally don't know what that word means. It's not independent of sentient organisms. So it's not, yeah, a function of the universe. that extinction is an objective moral truth. It's just not. He just doesn't know what words mean. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's simply the best solution to eliminate suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, it may objectively be the best solution, but it's not objectively the case that any view regarding anything is objective.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to morals or ethics, it's all subjective. A particular solution may be the best way to, achieve some goal, but there is no particular goal that can be regarded as objectively the best or worst. I think I can guess what Emendum's response is. Of course, I'm not going to pretend to be a mind reader, but he would say that, of course, the suffering in the brain is objective, the suffering is real, and of course, that's undeniably so.
Mm.
Suffering is an objective fact, and of course, every organism is interested in eliminating its own suffering, so it is universally true that we are interested in eliminating our own suffering, undoubtedly. I understand what he was saying when he was speaking to vegan gains. He's saying that definitionally suffering is bad. Of course, suffering is the basis of bad, obviously. What is suffering if not bad, and what is bad if not suffering? But it's not objectively, meaning it from the universe's standpoint. We'll just make it especially clear. From a totally inhuman standpoint, it's not necessarily factually true to say that eliminating suffering is a good thing. It's only our universally held opinion, well, nearly, because there are some crazy people who say that suffering is a good thing. But it's our nearly universally held subjective opinion that eliminating suffering is a good thing. And that's good enough for me. I'm fine with that. I'm fine saying that efilism is just our opinion at the end of the day. It's the best solution for eliminating suffering. And eliminating suffering being a good thing is just a subjective stance. I take no issue with that. But suffering objectively exists as a fact, obviously. It's something that's actually happening in physical brains.
Maybe you could say it's not objectively bad, as in independent of sentient beings, because, well, then it becomes how you can't suffer if you're not a sentient being, obviously. I'd say you could technically say it's not it's universally bad, not objectively bad, I suppose.
Indeed, because ultimately good and bad are the products of minds. Only brains are capable of coming up with good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, all we have is subjective morality. People like to act that somehow it has no value at all just because it's subjective. I mean, all we have is subjective stuff. You just gotta work with what we have. I don't think it really has less value. I mean, really, as he said, the only way it could be objective is if you were physically unable to resist it, right? You just couldn't. It was just a function of the universe. And it's not. I guess we just have to, accept that fact. And I don't think it really has much. I don't think it's significantly less valuable just because it's not objective, right? Because people like to pretend that it is, but it's like, no, I think we have to work with what we have.